Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Facebook made some changes in the last few days, and so streaming wasn't as easy this morning as it normally is. Pause here for a little bit and go ahead and get started. Of course, the 1 year anniversary, things don't go as smoothly as we were expecting, but we're all here now, so welcome. It'll just be a minute. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week. I hope everyone has had a good week. Has had an joyful St. Patrick's Day. This is the 53rd installment of the virtual office hour address. And, people continue to say that they appreciate these live stream addresses and hearing from their mayor. We've now reached 368 days after the March 16th county health order started the shelter in place a year ago in an attempt to really slow the spread of the virus. So we finally passed a year. So this will be a slightly different address from the normal weekly address, but we finally passed a year. And since that first declaration, a lot's happened, and more seems to happen every day. But it's been a difficult year for all of us. Life basically froze a year ago. We had to figure out a whole new direction for a lot of things. School became remote learning, work became remote work for those that were able to do it, and a lot of people have had, lost their jobs, myself included. I was laid off earlier this year, and you haven't seen your loved ones or your friends. You haven't had hugs, no meeting at the restaurant or the coffee shop. You don't have those you know, meetings that really made, living life in Sunnyvale so good. You know, a year ago, I thought, it would be a good idea to convert my weekly office hours that would happen at the Bean Scene Cafe downtown every Friday morning into these live stream events. And while I miss the virtual office hours quite a bit, or miss the in-person office hours quite a bit, I do think that, this has allowed me to reach out to a lot more people in our community, give you some updates, answer your questions, and provide some general words of encouragement. To me, giving the updates was the critical thing. It was providing the most recent information on what's happening with COVID, what the requirements are, what the restrictions are, from a county standpoint, from a state standpoint. And it's been a long haul to get to where we are today, and things are looking better. Definitely. You know, as I talk to people, there is a sense that we will be getting back to normal later in the summer. But in whatever that new normal is, definitely things have changed for all of us. You know, from a community standpoint, we've really come together and done whatever we can to help those in need. I was delivering masks, and we all have masks. When a year ago, people were donating masks to the mayor, and I was driving around the city, delivering masks to people who couldn't find them, who couldn't buy them. My wife was even uh, delivering toilet paper. We were a year ago, we were running out of supplies, and people weren't prepared for whatever the emergency was, and the pandemic is an emergency that none of us really expected. You know, Now we all have masks, and most of us have multiples, depending upon, it's now um, an addition to whatever you're wearing. So, I had my donut mask for the Dunkin' Donuts grand opening earlier this week. But, life has changed for everyone. They're from a city standpoint, we pivoted, and what we expected, what we finally approved from a budget was not what we expected. But from the actual services we provide, as opposed to just running a senior center, we were actually calling out to our seniors, calling them at home, making sure that they were okay, seeing if they needed food or medication picked up and delivered. And then, from our small businesses, we started a Sunnyvale Cares program, and that was providing five to $15,000 grants to our small businesses and nonprofits. And that was $600,000 of the city money, followed by our high tech companies putting in over and developers putting in over $700,000 to match that, to make sure that that program actually benefited those small businesses in our community. We also gave, over $1 million to Sunnyvale Community Services, and they're the front line in providing food and rental assistance and utility assistance to families in need. So, we really rely on them from a city standpoint to help out those in our community. So it's been a difficult haul, to say the least. We've done a lot in the last year, and we've had some positive things occur, of course. Like closing Murphy Avenue to only pedestrian traffic for the alfresco dining, and we've had, when we moved back to the purple zone, or when there was the regional lockdown, and there was only takeout again. We opened it back up for easier pickup and delivery of takeout, but it's closed again. And I think in the long run, the residents and definitely the businesses see that having that outdoor seating, having that outdoor dining environment really makes Murphy Avenue a much better place. And I've seen residents pull together to deliver food, medicine to homebound residents. Those that those that haven't been able to go outside. They provided blankets and food to some of the unhoused in our community. It's been difficult, especially on the students who haven't had the social interaction that they really rely upon. And then, teaching has had its bumps along the road in the last year. And it's good to see that a certain amount of in-person hybrid, you know, learning is finally going to happen again in our community. But I just want to say thanks to everyone for making it this far. It hasn't been easy for any of us, but I hope that as your mayor, I've tried to make it a little bit easier. Make sure that I never thought I would start the Sunnyvale Mayor's Restaurant Project. Now we're almost at 200 restaurants that I visited, and I finally went back to for St. Patrick's Day. I went back to Fibber McGee's to have that same sandwich that I had a year ago. I was able to sit outside and enjoy a drink, and it was a little bit nicer than just doing takeout that we were doing a year ago. But we're seeing changes, we're seeing improvements. From a personal standpoint, it hasn't been easy being mayor, but I think that I've been able to make a positive change in our community over the last year. I hope that our residents, and I think more residents know their mayor than probably ever before. Definitely, um, it's reaching out through that community, that network of friends, or helping out wherever you can has made a big difference. So I just want to congratulate you all. I wanted to start today's session a little bit differently because we have met that 1 year mark, and it's really reliant on all of you that we've been able to make it this far. Things are starting to open up more. And as we go towards the summer, as people get vaccinated, things will start seeing a little return to normalcy. I've already been starting to talk about what the state of the city looks like this year in September. We'll see where things go, but I commend all of you for the hard work it's taken to get to where we are today, and I look forward to how we continue to rebound. I'll continue doing these live stream events for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, at some point, it becomes once a month as opposed to every week as we continue the shelter in place. But definitely, I'm here to confer, advocate on your behalf. I'm here to answer your questions whenever I can. And I really thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during a difficult time. So, hope everyone's staying healthy. Remember to take care of yourself, as I say every week, both physically and mentally. Get out. We've had some rain this week, positive for possible drought conditions that might be coming. But and there's that general fatigue of staying at home. But people are getting vaccinated. People are able to start seeing some friends and family that they haven't seen for almost a year. So that's a positive thing that all of us can take away, that things are getting better. But keep following the county health orders. Do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Reduce the number of people you come in contact with. Maintain a safe social distance when you're out, and of course, wear your mask and get your vaccine when it's your time. So, anyway, we've now, reached the 368 days after the March 16th county health order, and so it hasn't been easy, but we passed that year point, and I commend all of you for doing the hard work and getting over at least this first line of making sure that things are opening up. So thank you, and thanks for allowing me to do this. I've really appreciated the positive feedback from so many of you in what we've done. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, city, and city level over the last 2 weeks. Last Tuesday, Governor Newsom had his State of the State address, and definitely it was not a normal address as opposed to the governor speaking at the state capitol in front of all the legislators. It was at Dodger Stadium in LA, and it was really with 56,000 empty seats to kind of talk about how we've lost almost a similar number of people to COVID-19 in California, about 54,000 since the COVID pandemic began. And the governor didn't really talk about policy. He really painted, I'll say, a rosy picture of the future of the state and the vaccine rollout. He did a slight reference to the recall, but kind of ignored the recall. But it was good from a certain standpoint. I think the governor, I think, painted a little cheerier picture than I would have expected. I would have hoped that he would have talked a little bit more about the policy and what his directions are. It wasn't just how recovering from COVID, but some of the programs that he talked about a year ago haven't been implemented, and what's going to happen. But we'll see where that goes. Last Wednesday, the House passed the COVID relief package, and this was a big step forward. I talked to Congressman Khanna that day, and he had already spoken on the House floor and was ready to vote on the package later in the day. But that package gives stimulus checks worth about $1,400 per person to about 90% of households. Unemployment assistance provides about $300 in federal boost to the weekly jobless payments, and that extends those payments through September 6th. It gives aids to state and municipalities, and that to me is something I've been working on for quite a while now with our state representatives or with our congressional representatives, as far as provided $350 billion to states, local governments, and that ultimately means about $29 million in two tranches that will be given to Sunnyvale, and so that'll be part of the budget this year. But the package also include housing aid, tax credits for families and workers, money to small businesses. It's about a $15 billion in emergency injury disaster loan program. It did $25 billion for new grant program for bars and restaurants. So it did a lot of things that really will, help out our businesses, our residents. So, it was good to talk to our state legislators and their staff last week during National League of Cities. It's one of the many conferences that our council members and the mayor go to, as far as representing the city, finding out what's happening, new programs, as well as taking some best practices from other cities and bring them to our own. So it was actually a good event last week, and it kind of coincided with what was happening at the federal level. The spotlight was at a federal level in that relief last week. Last Wednesday, Governor Newsom had a press conference, and he now announced that there will be a new color-coded tier that will be supposedly was going to be announced Friday, that they're finalizing. Right now we have purple, red, orange, and yellow. We're still in the red tier. At least we're not in the purple, most restrictive tier. San Mateo County earlier this week removed from red to orange. So some of our counties are starting to open up, but it was to define what a new green tier would look like. It was supposed to happen a week ago. It was supposed to happen last Friday. Governor Newsom still hasn't defined that from a state level, so hopefully, we get a better definition of what life looks like when we finally get to really open up. But things continue to look good from numbers, across the state. Where we stand now as opposed to where we stood 2 months ago is just amazing, as far as hospitalizations, as far as people that are still contracting COVID, a positive rate. ICU availability continues to increase. So all those things are positive indicators as far as where the state is going. Last Thursday, President Biden signed the COVID relief package, so now they're looking at how quickly, and I've heard that some people have already had the stimulus checks put into their accounts, so things are moving quickly from a federal standpoint. Last Thursday, county health officials had a press conference, and I've written letters to the state also to protest Governor Newsom's and the state's plans regarding, their vaccine allotment. And, this was a request to kind of remove Santa Clara from the scope of Blue Shield's vaccine distribution oversight. I think we've been doing a fantastic job right now, and the biggest thing is not having enough vaccines, and we've seen a definite drop in vaccines, not just at the state level, but at the county level, where we're not getting the same allocations that we were before. We have multiple pop-ups that were planned, and a lot of cancellations at our health centers for vaccination appointments, all because we're not getting enough vaccines. And a lot of this has to do with the governor's definition of equity. He's been focusing on, you know, Southern California and the Central Valley, doing it amongst zip codes and not census tracts, and we've been really spending a lot of effort in the Bay Area, and especially in Santa Clara, in providing vaccines to those in need. So we have been, giving vaccines to, having pop-ups in East San Jose and in South County, making sure that we're doing whatever we can as far as equity, from testing as well as providing vaccinations. But the governor has basically set us on kind of a different direction. So we've dramatically dropped the number of vaccines that we've been getting. And so hopefully, and I've heard issues with some of the Blue Shields, technical difficulties. And I think, from a county standpoint, we've been very good about setting up those appointments. So we've really demonstrated, our ability to carry out vaccine management as well as distribution. And so to me, Blue Shield trying to manage that for our county only provides another layer in there that we I don't think is a positive for us. And so maybe in other parts of the state that are having those issues, it makes sense. But as far as we're concerned, I don't think it's that useful. And there's also kind of an insurance provider, that conflict of interest of them providing vaccines and all that at a state level, to me, has some questionability as far as ties to Governor Newsom and everything else. So we'll see where that goes. On Saturday, I attended a state, well, at the Rotunda in San Jose. A group of community leaders joined a Stop API, Asian Pacific Islander Hate rally at the San Jose Rotunda. And it was leaders from around the county, but it was really put on by Assemblymember Evan Lowe and San Jose Councilmember Pam Foley, who brought everybody together to basically talk about some of the hate crimes that have happened in the last few months. And we've seen hate crimes dramatically increase in the last year. And it's not specific to the American Pacific Islander community. It's actually quite a few different groups that have had hate crimes committed against them. And so, it was good to basically highlight, and Sunnyvale had its own, Muslim-focused hate crime about 2 years ago. But it's to really focus on that we, need to band together to stop hatred, stop hatred, violence, extremism. They're not welcome in our community. Our diversity is one of our strengths. Our love is one of our strengths. Your actions, really make a world of difference in how we live in Sunnyvale and in the Bay Area. For me, it's treating people with kindness. It's speaking up when you see some injustice in your community, and it's just treating people how you would like to be treated. So for me, that was critical. It was great to rally together and highlight that. We're looking at adding our own unity event upcoming within Sunnyvale, and we've been planning that for a little while now. And what we've seen in the last week, as far as some of the incidents in definitely what happened back east, is unconscionable, and kind of you'll be hearing more about another unity event. And I think it's really important to have these dialogues, to have these town halls, to have first a discussion on some of the issues, as well as just hearing from our residents on some of their worries, and figuring out what they can do when they see injustice or when they see problems. But it's bringing everyone together to talk about these issues and not just disregarding them. So you'll be getting more information about that. That should happen early in April. But I think it's important that we all take a stand as far as that's concerned. And then on Monday of this week, We had our Dunkin' Donuts grand opening, and it wasn't, you know, it was pretty calm from that standpoint. Definitely not a big ribbon cutting as normally happens. You know, we had a few council members there. We had friends of the owner there and some of the workers, but it was good to at least celebrate that. You know, we've had a few, I think maybe only one other grand opening, maybe one or two other grand openings since shelter in place began, but all of them are low key events. You know, everybody masked up now, but it's important to still celebrate, and you know, the beginning of a new business is really important. And then on Tuesday, Governor Newsom had a press conference, and it was to highlight that schools are starting to reopen, the vaccines are starting to roll out, that several counties around the state are moving from the red tier to the orange tier, so they are opening up more. But Governor Newsom talked about the recall for the first time, and you know he's been focused on on his kind of press tour about vaccinations. We're how well we're doing, but the governor finally spoke for a while on the recall itself. The deadline for submission of signatures was Wednesday, and I've read that they've had about 2.1 million signatures. Of course, they all need to be verified. And Governor Newsom tried to brand this as basically a Republican recall effort, but it's not fully a Republican. At least a third of the signatures have come from Democrats or no party preference. The governors try to tie it to Trump, and even what happened at at the in the Capitol building. But a lot of this is tied to several things. One of which is people's fatigue of staying at home. The effects of closing businesses. It also directly is related to his visit to the French Laundry and not acting as he was asking other people to act. And so it's all those sorts of things that have got not just Republicans joining this. So there's a lot of issues, and it's the ever-changing vaccine distribution plans, the failure of EDD. There's been a lot of problems. Definitely it hasn't been an easy job. I know it hasn't been an easy job as mayor, and I can't even picture how hard it's been as governor. To try to fix some of the endemic problems in the state's administration of programs. And so hopefully we'll see where things go. But I think ultimately there will be a an election in September, October. We'll figure out what the timing of that really is, but that will ultimately come to pass. And then on Tuesday evening, Sunnyvale City Council met, and we met on several things. We declared March as National Red Cross Month, and Red Cross has been doing a great job in multiple ways. They're there for the crisis, especially during the fires last year. But they're also beneficial, in our local community when there was a fire at one of the apartment buildings a few years ago. That they were there for services and helping out wherever they could. And so it was important to publicize our special order of the day for the Red Cross and all the work that they do in our community. And then as far as general business, Sunnyvale City Council authorized the city manager to execute a site agreement for the installation of EV chargers on 3 different sites. One of which is the community center. So there will be 4 EV chargers at the community center. There will be 4 at the 2 of the downtown parking lots. So the one at Evelyn and South Francis, and the one at Evelyn and South Sunnyvale will each have 4 EV chargers. And so that I think is very good. Making EV chargers ubiquitous throughout our community is really important, because then it makes it even easier for those people with EVs to constantly be charging their cars. I think that's the important thing is making it so easy to charge that people stop using gas, our gas guzzling cars as much as possible. And then one of the other things that we did was we had some, a lot of discussions on the redistricting ordinance. So later this year, and it's later and later every time I hear, we'll be getting the census data from the 2020 census. But because we moved to districts last year, to Sunnyvale split into 6 districts, we will then have to go through the process of redistricting those district boundaries based upon the new census data. So we finalized the ordinance wording that'll come back to us in one of our next meetings, and then we'll do the first reading of that ordinance. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the health dashboard on testing and hospitalizations and vaccinations. From a national standpoint, we have about 29.4 million cases of COVID. That's up about 400,000 in the last week. So it continues to drop. We've surpassed 116 million people vaccinated. And from a California standpoint, we've had about 3.5 million positive cases and almost 55,000 fatalities. And then on a positive note, we've had about 13 million people vaccinated from a state standpoint. So things are looking good. That being said, and the governor always says, it's like, well, we're, from a population standpoint, we vaccinated more people than 4 or 5 other countries. The top 4 or 5 other countries are only a few countries that have vaccinated more people than us. That being said, we're the 5th. We would place as the 5th largest economy. So ultimately, that has to be balanced. If you start comparing us to other states, we're only doing so well. We're about number 40 on the state number of states that have residents that are fully vaccinated. So we only have about 11% of our state of our residents that are currently vaccinated, and we're even closer to the bottom when we look at vaccines used. So meaning that we haven't distributed them correctly, or so there have been there are definitely some issues still as far as the administration of those vaccines. And then from the number of cases, from a county standpoint, continues to trend downward. We've only went up from a county standpoint about 850 new cases over the last week. So we're up at 113,000. So it's so definitely we're less than 1,000 increase in 1 week, which is fantastic. When about 2 months ago we were about 7,000 or 8,000 new cases on a week-to-week basis. So to have less than 1,000 about 8 weeks later is fantastic. And then we've had 1,892 deaths in our county related to COVID, and we only have about 148 people that are still hospitalized related to COVID. So all of our numbers continue to drop, which is really good. And by the numbers, San Jose has went up about 500 cases from last week, so they're at about 74. They've had now 74,000 cases of COVID, and we went up about 60 additional new positive COVID cases in the last week. So we've had about 5,250 people in Sunnyvale that have been diagnosed with COVID-19. I continue to do a lot of advocacy on the city's behalf, on your behalf, at a county level. We continue those discussions with our county health supervisors on testing, as well as getting vaccines. The mobile county pop-up van will be back at Murphy Park this Monday from 9:30 to 4. So you can go right now to sccfreetest.com freevax.org and sign up to get tested. So it's that's fairly simple, and I think last I looked, there were plenty of appointments available. And then if you need to get tested, if you need to get vaccine, if you're now qualified, you can go to sccfreevax.org and sign up. The appointments are a little bit more difficult there, but there are appointments available. You can also, I hear people having some success in going to the CBS website of getting vaccines. So hopefully, if you're available, if you're now authorized to get the vaccine, hopefully you can be able to do that. As of March 15th, people between 18 and 64 with some underlying health conditions are now qualified to get those vaccines. That being said, it's still difficult because we just don't have enough vaccines in the county and the state. So let me, if you can get the vaccine, definitely do, because it does make a difference. Let me go ahead and update you on some upcoming events. So our next council meeting is on March 28th, and it starts at 5 p.m. on a study session on Moffett Park. And currently there's a survey, so an online survey going on, and I posted about that earlier this week, as far as what's happening at Moffett Park and what people would like to see, what their priorities are. So if you get a chance, fill out that survey. That'll be one of the things we'll be going through at that meeting, and trying to talk about, kind of distill what we've had over 3 public outreach meetings that have happened over the last few months. We'll be doing our first reading of the redistricting ordinance, and so this is, maybe there will be no more changes. We've given a lot of direction to staff over the last few meetings as far as how our redistricting committee will be set up, and so that'll be 7 committee members plus 6 alternates, 1 per district. And I think ultimately we've set up a good application process, and so then it'll be rolling that process out in the next few months, applying people, having people apply, go through an interview process, placing them on that committee and then the alternates, and then kicking off that effort later this year when we start getting that census data. So hopefully that goes smoothly. One of the other things we'll be doing is at the next council meeting is approving the distribution of our community development block grants. And you'll hear me talk about CDBG grants, CDBG, and a lot of things. These are federal grants that are all based upon population. And so this was one of the reasons why the census was so important last year, is because a certain amount of federal dollars that are completely based upon how many people live in your community. So we'll see what the census looks like. These are still based upon the previous census data, and so this is what we do on a yearly basis, is allot those to different nonprofits as far as funding, to make sure that they have additional funds to service what the people in our community. Okay, let's go ahead and get to questions. Dale asks, is it true that many migrants who have crossed our southern border will be transported over here to NASA? I heard that on the news. So I've continually been in contact with our NASA representatives, and I would talk to them prior to that announcement last week, but the Department of Health and Human Services has requested assistance from other federal agencies to determine whether or not they have any vacant properties that might be available and ultimately suitable for potential future use as temporary care facilities for the influx of unaccompanied migrant children. And so HHS and NASA are currently evaluating Moffett Park. There are a certain amount of apartments there that were normally used for interns during the summer, for students that were working with NASA or working for NASA during the summer, but they still need to determine whether or not they're suitable, and provide that shelter space in the future. it wouldn't have any impact on NASA's ability to do what they're doing with different space missions and other efforts. But definitely there's been some backlash already from certain people in the community. That being said, definitely from a NASA standpoint, you know, they're there to provide what they can, and those facilities are currently sitting idle, and so could conceivably used as a temporary location. Chris asked, when is Hanabusa opening? And so Hanabusa, you may or may not have seen it. It's a Japanese pancake. It's a new restaurant that they set up at the corner of Washington. No, yes, Washington and Mary. So they're at the corner of Washington and Mary in that little shopping center where Starbucks used to be. I reached out to them. They are in their final steps. They've been working with the county health department on their final plans, and there were some after the inspection. There were some minor changes that the county health wanted. So they're currently implementing those changes, and hopefully it'll be good news in the next week. So in the next week or two, definitely there'll be some announcements. So that's getting a lot closer as far as that's concerned. Um, let's see. Do you have any idea how many Sunnyvale people have completed a vaccine sequence? That came from George. No, we don't. So we have some numbers from a county standpoint, so the county's keeping track. But the way the vaccines are distributed, it's very difficult. So a lot of the vaccines are going straight to the healthcare providers, and then some of them are going straight to the different pharmacies. So CVS, Rite Aid are getting 50 to 100 vaccination doses per day. So because of all that, that information isn't being funneled into any specific location. So as opposed to testing, which had to be reported through the state, the state is just keeping track of number of first and second doses distributed, and not really what on a per zip code basis how many it is. So we're trying to get that information, but that hasn't been available as of yet. So that's one of the things that I would like to know too, of how well vaccine distribution is happening in our community. There's some info from the county, but there isn't enough as far as all the other places that people can get vaccinated. Do you have a projected end date for the Civic Center project completion? So right now, so from a Civic Center standpoint, and you might, if you go by, you see that we've moved a lot of the trees that were along Olive in front of City Hall. We've also kind of closed down the parking lot next to the DPS. But right now we're on track to open the new City Hall by fall of 2022. So only a mere year and a half from now, the addition on the DPS should be complete, as well as the new City Hall should be ready to move into. Then of course they're still tearing down the existing City Hall, the annex. That was one of the things that the design that currently allows us to basically have City Hall open, the old City Hall, the old annex, the trailers that city workers are still working in. All that's allowed to be open, even while we work on the new City Hall. So that construction moves forward, but that's the weather has been fairly good, and we've done a lot of the big things. The moving several of the camphor trees. There were, in the last 2 weeks, we ended up moving 2 trees that were pretty major trees in front of City Hall. They were about 250,000 pounds, and they were moved from in front of City Hall to along Americana Way right at Matilda. So now they're basically stationed on either side of Americana Way. So anyway, things are moving along, and I'm happy to see that. I just wanted to remind people, so many parents, so many people are. We had this question last week. Are worried about the schools reopening, and definitely there was a reopening plan issued from Sunnyvale School District earlier this week. Schools are starting to open up. If you're out there, please be careful. Kids are back to schools starting this week, starting next week, depending upon what the school districts are. Please, and a lot of these are trying out hybrid first, so kids going to school a few days a week or morning or afternoon. But definitely, please be careful, because a lot of these kids haven't been walking to school or biking to school for some time now, and the routes they're still trying to figure out their routes all over again. So please, do your part. Be careful when you're out there. Watch for parents and kids heading off to school. So I'm happy to see that some of the kids are going back to school. It's actually really important. Let's go ahead and wrap up. With the late start, we started a little bit late, and hopefully those issues will be fixed by Facebook before next week. Let's go ahead and wrap up. I just want to thank you, as always, for joining me again this week. I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. Life continues to be difficult, but things are getting better. New issues come up, but you respond to whatever that issue is. You continue to wear your mask. I hear about people getting their vaccines. So uh, continue to build community, especially during difficult times. I'm proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together to help those in need. Providing free food, providing free helping out, delivering groceries. If you're out, say hello from a safe social distance. People really miss that interaction. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We will get through this together. So thanks for listening. Until next week, have a happy first day of spring tomorrow. But continue to wear your mask. Take care. Stay safe. Okay, goodbye.